Dudes, dudettes, I'm Curtis, and in this video I'm going to show you how to build one of the most useful table saw sleds ever. It's patterned after MicroJig's 360 sled, so I'm going to be plowing some dovetail grooves into it. That way I can use their dovetail clamps and their match fit hardware. I'll also be using their ZeroPlay guide bar to run my sled and my miter slot. However, unlike their sled, I'm also going to inlay this T-track into my sled so I can use my Kreg Miter bar with it. The first thing you need to decide is what kind of material do you want to build your sled out of. Personally, for sleds and jigs and fixtures like that, I am a huge fan of MDF. It's flat, it's easily machined. Oh, and I have never, ever got a splinter from using MDF. But you can use plywood. If you use plywood, like I did for my bandsaw sled here, just make sure you use a high quality plywood. Check the edge of the plywood before you build it and make sure there's no holes or gaps in it. Because if you find a gap kind of like this one right here, when you plow your dovetail grooves out, you're going to get all sorts of chip out, tear out. Oh, and did I mention splinters? Now that your material is selected, figure out what size of sled you want to build. In this video, I'm going to build my sled to be 18 inches by 18 inches. Why? Well, that's all the material I have, so I didn't really want to run to the store and pick up more MDF, so 18 by 18 it is. Now my bandsaw sled is 11 by 11. Why? Well, because my table is smaller. Bottom line is your needs determine the width of your sled. So if you have a bigger tabletop, maybe you want to go 24 by 24. If you got a smaller tabletop, maybe 16 by 16. Either way, the sled should be dimensioned to fit your needs. The next thing you need to determine is where do you want to plow your dovetail grooves? Because my sled is 18 inches wide, I'm plowing my grooves every 4.5 inches. That will give me 3 vertical and 3 horizontal grooves. But there's only 2 rules that apply. The first is plow them where you need them. There's no rule that says it has to be in a checkerboard pattern, although that is the most common pattern used. The other rule is keep them about 3 inches away from each other and the edge of the board. If you don't, you will risk delamination, and trust me, if you're in the middle of a build and you have some delamination, well, yeah, it's almost as bad as a splinter. All right, guys, we're about ready to start plowing the dovetail grooves, but before we do that, we want to plow a relief channel in here first. Now, the reason we do that is because the dovetail bit itself, it takes a huge bite out of the material. So plowing a relief channel will not only extend the life of your bit, but it will also give you a cleaner channel. Remember, you cannot sneak up to the final depth of your cut. If you do that, the top of the groove will be too wide to be useful. To me, the preferred method for plowing relief grooves is to use the table saw. Using the MicroJig setup gauge, I've set the height of my blade to 11/32 of an inch, and if you'll remember, right, I was plowing my my dovetail grooves at 4.5 inch intervals, so that is what I set my rip fence to. Now all I have to do is run my sled through the saw 4 different times, 1 on each edge. That way I will have 4 grooves on there. Then I'll move my rip fence by 1/8 of an inch and repeat those cuts. That will give me my 1/4 inch wide relief channels. Well, I've plowed all of the relief channels on the exterior portion of my sled, and now I want to plow a relief channel right down the middle. I'm only going to plow one of them, though. I will plow this channel here later. This is where I'm going to put my T-track, by the way, but I will plow that at a later step so I can make it square with my fence. But in the meantime, I have already set my fence for 9 inches, so it's time to plow the center relief channel. I'm going to use my router table to plow the dovetail grooves. Using the MicroJig setup gauge, I've already set the height of my router bit to 3/8 of an inch, and then I set my fence just by eyeballing it. As long as this dovetail bit is in the middle of the relief groove, that's all that really matters. Like I said, I believe in doing things the easy way, so I left my tape measure out of this operation. Well, I have reset my fence, and now it's time to plow the center dovetail groove. Now that my grooves are plowed, it's time to figure out where do I want to mount my ZeroPlay miter bar at. So the easy way to figure out where you're going to mount your miter bar is to just place your sled somewhere on the table. Now there's two rules you need to keep in mind when you're mounting your ZeroPlay. First is, you don't want to drill any holes in grooves. Obviously, that's pretty self-explanatory as to why, so just make sure when you position your ZeroPlay that none of these brass fittings are covering a groove. The other is, you want the right edge or the left edge, depending on where you're mounting your miter bar, to just barely hang over the saw blade. That way, after the miter bar is mounted, you can trim this edge off and you will have a zero clearance sled. Well, I've drawn my line that's 6 1/4 inches away from the edge of the sled, and I also marked at 4-inch intervals where I'm going to be drilling holes to mount my ZeroPlay to. The first thing I have to do is countersink the hole, so I'm going to use this 1/2-inch Forstner bit, and the blue tape is about 5/16 of an inch deep, so I will have a nice countersink for the top of my screw heads to fit in. Then I'm going to finish drilling the hole with this 1/4-inch bit. This 1/4-inch bit is wider than the screw itself, so once you put the screw in there, there's going to be a little slop in here, which is what you need to square your fence up or your sled up to your fence. Well, I've used my punch to mark out where I'm going to start drilling the holes. Now it's time to start drilling the holes. Okay, so I've countersunk my holes. Now I've changed my drill bit, and I'm going to finish drilling the holes all the way through. I'm at the point where I need to adjust my ZeroPlay, so what I did is I put a couple of nickels into my T-track here. If you don't have a T-track, you might have to use pennies, but the whole point is you want to kind of raise your ZeroPlay up so the top of it rides against the top of the groove, because really once it's mounted to the sled, that's where it's going to go. So I'm going to try to do this using just one hand, and once I put it in the slot, then I'll just kind of maybe use two hands here. Kind of adjust it until it has a little bit of resistance, but not a lot. And then I just tighten my screws down like so. My ZeroPlay has been adjusted and I'm ready to attach it to the bottom of my sled. When I attach it, I'm going to make sure that these brass fittings are facing the bottom of the sled. And I do that for two reasons. One is I want access to these bolts right here. If I need to make an adjustment to the width of this thing, you know, if I take my sled to a different saw, I might want to make the width a little different. So I want access to these 3 bolts here. The other is, if I mount it this way and I have the screw going all the way through here, it's going to pinch these 2 pieces of material together. Now, I don't know if that's going to cause a problem with the width or not, but I figure if I don't have to take that chance, I'm not going to. Now I'm just going to affix it to my sled here, and you'll notice I have the brass inserts against the sled like I just talked about. All I've got to do is kind of attach it down here. Okay, my ZeroPlay is mounted. Like I said, it's a loose fit. So now I'm just going to put my sled into the miter slot, and you'll notice it rocks back and forth, which is perfect, because now all I have to do is bring over my rip fence, lock it down. It is now square to my rip fence. Tighten up my 3 screws. And now my sled is ready to go. Next step, I'm just going to raise my saw blade up and trim this puppy down, and I will have a zero clearance sled. Now that I know this edge here is square to my fence, I can plow the channel to mount my my miter bar or my miter bar in here. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I want it to be, you know, right in somewhere in the center. So I'm just going to start plowing a channel from here over to here, 1/8 of an inch at a time. So what I'll do is I'll set up my the sight height of my blade to match my T-track. And then I'll just adjust my fence by eyeballing it and start plowing in the channel. Alrighty then, I'm just about finished. My groove is plowed, but I realized I have to make a design change. Originally, I was just going to use a T-track like that, but then I realized my miter bar itself extends from here to here, which is longer than my sled. So rather than just limiting myself, I'd have to almost glue my miter fence into place if I used a shorter track. I didn't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to use a longer track, kind of like this one here, and I'll position it right about there. And then the beauty of it is I can loosen this miter stop here, and I can install one back here as well, but I'll be able to move my fence forward and backwards on my sled now. Granted, I'm going to have a couple of tails sticking out of my sled, but this will give me the flexibility I want. I have already sanded and scuffed the bottom of it, so now it's just a matter of putting a couple of drops of Gorilla Glue on there and gluing the T-track into place, and my sled will be ready to use. I got my super glue out here, and I'm just going to put a couple of drops on my track, and then I'm going to stick it into place and clamp it down. And alrighty then, the glue is dried and my sled is complete. Now if I just want to change the angle, all I have to do is release this back screw a little bit, pull out the pin. Let's say I want to go to 22.5 degrees, put the pin in place, lock it down, make sure my fence is not extending over the side, because if it hits the blade, yeah, there goes a cartridge, and I don't want to do that. But all in all, I think this is going to work out really well. Hey, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something here, or maybe came up with an idea on how you can make your sled a little more versatile to meet your needs. Please add comments, or if you make your own, post pictures of them. I would love to see what you build or what you think of this build. Have an ordinary day, guys. Later.